Welcome to Technical, a bi-coastal podcast where Silicon Alley meets Silicon Valley. This is a podcast for technology professionals, so we go pretty deep. I'm your host, Bill Kozel of TechWriters NYC. At TechWriters NYC, we translate geek speak. Visit us at techwriters.nyc. My guest this week is Bob Evans, founder and principal of Evans Strategic Communications. Bob began his career at CMP Media, where he was employee number 50. He spent 30 years there, during which time the company expanded dramatically. It eventually went public and was later acquired by UBM. After that, Bill McDermott of SAP hired him to be VP of Strategic Communications. He then went on to serve for 5 years as Oracle's Chief Communications Officer under Larry Ellison. Bob publishes a newsletter called Cloud Wars, which is not to be confused with InfoWars. Cloud Wars was launched on LinkedIn and then moved to Forbes.com. It has been read by nearly 2 million people. I'm delighted to have Bob on my program. Welcome to Technical, Bob.
Hey, Bill, thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. Okay, so first, what are the current top 10 rankings, and how are they clustered in terms of revenue?
You know, Bill, so much going on in the tech industry today, especially around cloud, right? With a lot of the new cloud native companies coming up and disrupting the way the tech industry worked and winning a lot of converts among business people. And then you've got some of the older tech companies. And it's funny thinking of a company that's, 40 years old as old, or as some people like to call it, old tech. But everybody's trying to get into this because, Bill, one of the most intriguing things is, for business customers, it lets them spend less money on IT stuff that doesn't matter and more on the stuff that helps to dazzle customers and engage differently and differentiate themselves. So I set out the Cloud Wars Top 10 to try to talk about the business strategies of the different players in there, how they're doing, where they're strong, where they're not so strong, which ones are really aligning with what business customers want and need today.
How are the top three, Microsoft Azure, Amazon, and IBM, different from one another?
Bill, that's an interesting question about the differentiation among the top three. And if I could first just a little preamble on that I've developed something called the law of the cloud, right? You've got the jungle, which is kill or be killed. And the law of the cloud is get as big as you can, as fast as you can, and expand into as many of the three layers of the cloud as you can. Because more and more, I think business people are looking for not just a slice of the cloud, but they want to be able to deal with a cloud provider who could handle all three parts of it. So the applications and the infrastructure and the stuff in the middle, the platform. So Microsoft is very strong in all three of those areas, right? It has a Dynamics 365 apps. It's got Azure in the middle. And it's got, an extraordinary set of data centers around the world. IBM is quite similar in that way, where it too plays at all three layers, infrastructure, platform, and applications. And Bill, what I think is interesting, one of the reasons I wanted to start this whole Cloud Wars series of articles in the newsletter as well, is there's this common misperception that Amazon is the runaway leader in the cloud, that it dominates, and that is just not true. Amazon's a fantastic company. I have a ton of respect for them. But where Amazon is strong is in one specific layer of the cloud, the infrastructure side. And over in there, there's no question. Amazon is the dominant player. But when you look across all three layers, Microsoft is the dominant enterprise cloud player. Amazon's a close second. IBM is a very close third. And a lot of people are shocked to hear that IBM is up in that category with those other two. The early days of the cloud were all about this public cloud infrastructure and who could offer the infrastructure as a service. And Amazon is such an interesting company in so many ways. And they had this really compelling story, right? That they started out as a retailer to handle holiday season rushes. They had to build up an incredibly big, powerful data center infrastructure. But for 6, 7, 8, 9 months of the year that were not in the holiday season, a lot of that big capacity they built up was being unused. So Amazon said, hey, instead of having this stuff sit here dormant, why don't we rent some of this technology and the expertise we've built up. Why don't we sell that to other people? That's where Amazon really got the jump, and there's no question they're the category king there, being chased by Microsoft, by IBM, by Google, by Oracle. But it's an incredibly expensive business to get into. I think Google, Microsoft, Amazon spent $40 billion in 1 year, calendar 2017, to build this stuff out.
Wow.
So it's a part of the cloud that anybody can come wandering into. The other two areas, platform is fairly high end. It's big, sophisticated stuff in the middle, but it's the SaaS part, the applications part, where there's more opportunity for lots of smaller companies to jump in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think it's so important that a few of these companies differentiate themselves, Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, in playing at all three layers. And Amazon's dominance is in just one of those three. So great company, but they are not the king of the cloud.
Mm-hmm. And what are the services? What are the differences in the services?
Well, depending on what a company needs at a certain time, right? Underlying it all is sort of the pipes and the plumbing, the infrastructure side that they offer. So compute as a service, storage as a service, instead
Mm-hmm.
of businesses having to go out and endlessly buy more and more and more storage devices, more space in the data centers, more electricity, more air conditioning, these incredibly secure, high security around these places like that. It gets to be pretty expensive. And also, Bill, as you've seen so much these days in the news, the issue of cybersecurity, not just physical security, but the cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, say you're an outstanding company in financial services or retailing, and you've got 250 or 300 really, really good people working on cybersecurity. Are those 250 or 300 people within your company, are they going to be able to do a better job than Microsoft does with thousands of people working on cybersecurity issues all over the world? So the premise, right, for the cloud stuff on the infrastructure side is we're going to take away the burden that businesses have had for so long of buying more and more stuff that as soon as they buy it, it's sort of obsolete. There's
Mm-hmm.
new stuff coming out that's better, cheaper, faster, more secure, and so on. So the cloud takes that burden away from businesses. The platform stuff in the middle is databases and other things that connect the infrastructure to the applications. Most of us understand the third layer, SaaS, the application side. That's what we use on our phones. That's how we do our banking. That's how we watch media. That's how we keep an eye on what our kids are doing with their grades at school. On and on. It's how we communicate. So the SaaS layer is the most accessible, but underneath that are those other two pieces that are fundamental to making all of this stuff work for businesses. But Bill, the basic premise, of course, is instead of businesses having to run really like they did 150 years ago, their own power plants, create their own electricity, let somebody else handle that, and let you, the business person, just be able to tap into those services over the internet.
Do all the companies have similar applications, or?
It's interesting, just as all the big traditional enterprise tech companies, they didn't all make the same sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Not all the cloud providers too, especially the top 10, they all have got some different things to offer. And each one tries to do some of the things that they really specialize in and can do very well. So like you said, Amazon is just, unmatched in the infrastructure side of things, but they've got some other competitors coming in. Oracle has a tiny infrastructure as a service business, but Larry Ellison believes that some of the technical innovations that Oracle has supplied, because it can put software and hardware together to do things that a hardware-only company, more like Amazon, isn't able to do. So, everybody's got their own pitches, their own angles, and their own spin on some stuff. But ultimately, what I try to do with the Cloud Wars is say which of these cloud providers are addressing the most pressing business needs of their customers.
Mm-hmm.
Because, Bill, I think, you can get into these endless games of, technology bake-offs and whose chip is faster and whose network is faster. And all that stuff's really important.
Mm-hmm.
But the industry has been so focused on itself, the navel gazing for so long, that I think some companies have lost sight of what are the customers thinking about this. And I think the most intriguing company in that context is IBM, because the other day IBM's Q1 earnings numbers came out. They weren't all that impressive, but
Yeah.
cloud business, IBM's cloud business is 4 or 5 times bigger than Google's.
Hmm.
And that's just stunning to most people. It's as big as Oracle and SAP and Google combined.
Wow.
IBM's done an amazing job there. And what I'm trying to do with the Cloud Wars thing is to show some of these customer-oriented perspectives on the world there, because ultimately I think we in the cloud industry and sort of the Cloud Wars thing, they got to get out of the mindset of this Silicon Valley bubble. And they've got to think more about, how do I apply this great technology I've created in ways that customers care about it.
Yeah. And you said that
Yeah.
2018 is the year of the customer. And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's funny, Bill, there's when I've compared some of these companies, I get some technical readers or people so often from the Valley or research firms say you can't compare a company that does cloud applications with a company that does cloud infrastructure. And I said, well, I'm looking at it from the point of view of the customer and what the customer needs, and they're evaluating all of these companies. So I think the year of the customer, Bill, has two big angles. One is the customers are forcing the cloud vendors to get out of this sort of arms race that is driven purely by technical details, and more about, how do I tailor, as a cloud vendor, this brilliant engineering and technology I have to put it more in the service of the specific needs of my customers. The second side of it, Bill, is when in the sort of traditional tech business, right? If I'm any one of these big companies and you buy software from me and you give me $10 million and I drop off a huge set of, CDs and drives at your loading dock, then I drive that truck away and I deposit that check and our business is done. You bought it, you own it, you take care of it, you fix it, because, I'm out of the picture. When you go over to the cloud, right, people are renting this stuff, and every 2 or 3 years, when their subscription is about to lapse, that customer is then going to evaluate the vendor. Did you earn a renewal from me over the last 2 or 3 years, or did you prove by not so good service that I should hop to somebody else? So the year of the customer, Bill, one of the things that comes up there is, the old-fashioned ideas of customer satisfaction, which is nice but limited, then customer loyalty, which is more important. Now all these cloud vendors really have to focus on customer success, which is, don't just drop off the technology and run away and cash the check, but how do I work closely with these customers to ensure this is a successful installation, it's meeting their business needs, solving their business problems, and making them more successful. And I think that's hugely important. And that's why I think 2018 is the year of the customer.
And then you have the software as a service niche providers like Salesforce, ServiceNow, and Workday. How do companies who use those services also use a service like Azure?
Well, it's two things. It's funny, they are niche providers, as you look at it that way, but Salesforce has revenue of $10 billion, and they're growing, extremely fast. ServiceNow and Workday just both passed $2 billion in annual revenue. Bill, they're both growing about 40% a year. So it's almost like in this case you'd put, quotation marks or something around niche, because the $2 billion niche is pretty good, and they're growing so fast. So
but they're focused on CRM and HCM.
They are.
Yeah.
But where they're moving out of some of that is Salesforce does other things. With some things it does with analytics, and not just CRM, but now they're getting into service and configure, price, quote. Because remember, Bill, that if the law of the cloud has any validity, it's get as big as you can, as fast as you can, and expand into as many layers. Salesforce knows that Oracle is coming after it very hard with a very broad set of SaaS applications. So to the degree that it makes sense for Salesforce, it's expanding sideways, adding more types of apps, so it's not seen as just a one-trick pony. ServiceNow started off offering a great application for IT departments. Now they're in HR, they're in customer service. They're moving out into additional areas, but they're taking the model that they really, really perfected there and opening up in different areas. And Workday, which, as you say correctly, started off in HCM, they're now getting into financials. They're also moving into analytics. They're also going to move into the platform as a service space as they get bigger and their customers want to do more things with their applications. So what Bill, I guess the big thing there is where these cloud vendors are right now is going to be very different 6 or 12 or 18 months from now.
And where's your former employer, Oracle, in all of this?
Yeah, Oracle's been a very interesting player in the cloud. They, Oracle has a massive, massive set of products. Bill, it's hard to tell sometimes at Oracle. Some people would say 5,000 products, 6,000 set. Anyways, a huge product set. And Larry Ellison decided 10 or 12 years ago that cloud thing is coming, and he said, we're going to rewrite all of our IP. We're going to convert all of those, thousands of products over to the cloud. It took them a long time to do that. Some people say they're late to the cloud and so on. And, I guess to some extent, you could make that case. On the other hand, they're ideally positioned now because they didn't just do a little bit here and a little bit there. They converted everything they have for the cloud. Larry Ellison, is a genius. I think he'll be remembered as one of the great, not just tech leaders of this era, but business leaders of this era. Mm-hmm. And his view is we are going to be so deep in every one of the 3 layers. And since we've taken all of our traditional technology, we've got it all ready for the cloud now. He feels that some of the competitors have not done that, and he plays the long game, Bill. So he believes that, don't look at this as a 12 or 18 month sprint. This is going to be a 5, 7, 8 year marathon, and he believes, Oracle's in a great position to be able to do that. And as with anything, we will see what the customers decide about that.
We've talked a lot about IoT on this program. And last week we had a panel on fog computing and AI. And how does cloud facilitate these technologies?
Bill, it's a great question. I just want to be sure I understand from your perspective, fog computing. Could you tell me, what exactly you mean by that?
Yeah, it's the sensors in a manufacturing environment talking with one another and then uploading their analytics to the cloud.
Yeah, it's remarkable what's going on now with IoT, and not just the spread of these devices, but you'll hear more and more terms like fog computing or the edge, right? And what's out on the edge are all these devices that initially were conceived to just be, transmitting data back to sort of the host, whether that's in the cloud or an on-premises system or so on. Well, what's happening now is there's so much action, Bill, out there at the edge. You don't want these devices to be only able to transmit. What if it's better for that application or the job that's being done there for those IoT devices to have intelligence in them, to be able to do computing and make decisions, and as you were talking about, the analytics out there at the edge instead of having to make that round trip every time back and forth. So that's where I think there's going to be a ton of interesting stuff going on, right? Because the initial concept of IoT, which is, smart sensors that send in data and collect stuff, but they're not really decision makers, right? Mm-hmm. They're sort of ushers that move things along. Well, now when they get this intelligence built in, that's going to be quite compelling. So Microsoft has been jumping out on this, where they talk about, the intelligent cloud meets the intelligent edge. And if you think about that from the customer's point of view, whether it's Microsoft or some of these other terrific companies, the possibilities that can happen when you have intelligence across your entire estate of physical assets with an airplane, with an oil well, with a cargo ship, in a retail store, all these different environments, in a hospital. It's really extraordinary what the next 2 or 3 years are going to bring in innovation. And you weave AI into that, Bill, and it's really an extraordinary time, to be alive and to be, thinking about what's going on here in the business world.
If I'm a company that wants to get into the cloud, where do I begin?
Do you mean, Bill, from the vendor side, or as a business that's going to
A
use?
business that's going to into the cloud, and I don't imagine there are many that aren't in the cloud, but there may be.
Yeah, Bill, it's funny. I think that, for a while people saw it as this will help us lower costs. Okay, so if we can save 12%, it's worth a little risk. But I'm going to start off with, I'm going to put my HR system in the cloud first, because if that gets screwed up, my employees won't like it so much, but it won't affect my customers. And then
Mm-hmm.
they said, yeah, we'll do a couple of other simple things, like we'll try some marketing in the cloud. And everybody sort of sat back and they were sort of waiting for a bomb to go off or some disaster to happen. And then you find, no, this stuff works. It works pretty well. And more, then they say, okay, let's put stuff that's a little closer to our core business out there in the cloud. And again, they found over and over, it wasn't just a suitable alternative. It actually was quite superior in a number of ways, because you can get upgrades to new capabilities with cloud software more quickly. We had talked earlier about the way that security is enhanced and performance is enhanced.
Mm-hmm.
You certainly get the cost savings, but the big thing seems to be this more quicker time to innovation, quicker time to value, and it allows a company to spend less time and money running an IT factory and more time and more effort and more focus on delighting its customers in whatever business that company's in.
Tell me something about the cloud that would surprise me.
Well, I guess part of it is some people say that it's an idea that's been around for decades, and they have these old terms for it. I don't get overly caught up in that. I guess one of the big things is, one of the numbers I thought about this was that $40 billion in a year. Some people, Bill, say that in that side of the cloud, the infrastructure as a service, where Amazon dominates and Microsoft is very strong, and Google and Oracle's trying to play. IBM is doing quite well there. Some people talk about that as a race to the bottom, because they have to spend so much on these unbelievably big, sophisticated, complex data centers. They have to have them all over the world
Mm-hmm.
to meet the data residency, and now with Europe, the GDPR regulations. The costs of doing that business are prohibitive. No new competitor will get into that space. So it's who's ever in is in, who's ever not in, they're not going to get in. So I think that that's an area where the dollars are staggering. But can you make money at that? That's hard to say. I think one of the other thing about the cloud that's surprising is how quickly businesses are starting to adopt this,
Mm-hmm.
and they're moving. We saw some of Microsoft's largest customers in the world, so some of the world's biggest companies are shifting their big SAP enterprise-wide applications that they run their business on, everything, their supply chain, their financials, everything. They're shifting those over to run on Azure in the Microsoft cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all in these days, and I think that pace of uptake in the cloud will just accelerate.
You also have a day job of strategic consulting and storytelling. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, Bill, it's something I did for a long time, as you mentioned, and your kind introduction there about in the media business. I covered the tech space for a long time as a reporter and an analyst and as an editor, and I really enjoyed that. I'm not a technologist, so I got to see it from the business strategy side and competitive differentiation, those sorts of things. And when I decided to get into the tech space, instead of just writing about it, get into it, one of the reasons I wanted to do that was because these companies are so good at making remarkable stuff, but in some cases they were not so good at talking about it. So I thought there would be a great opportunity there. The time at SAP was fantastic. They're terrific people, and we tried to put a little more emphasis on what's the business value that customers are getting out of this, and a little less emphasis on the spectacular code and engineering that went into it. Very similar challenge at Oracle. So when I decided to strike out on my own, just less than a year and a half ago, I figured there's a lot of businesses today, Bill, outside of the tech industry, but they've undergone this common phrase of digital transformation, and they become very, very different sorts of companies, right? In that consumer-driven economy, we want companies to do business the way we want. And I laugh sometimes, talking to people who are 30 years old or under, and I'll ask them, have you ever heard the term banker's hours? And they look at me like it means nothing to them. But remember, depending on your vintage, Bill, that was the thing. They're open Monday to Friday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Right.
And other than that, you're out of luck. So as companies go through these changes, who they are, the value they promise, the degree to which how they engage with their customers, is all these things are changing in profound ways. So what I try to do with my business is help top executives understand, who are we now as a company? Why do customers, whether those are businesses or individuals, why do they want to buy stuff from us? How do they see us? What new things do they want from us? And how do we position ourselves in the right way to appeal to them? Help work with some of the sales organizations. How do they articulate what they're selling in ways that resonate more with customers? Less about the stuff, more about the value that's being created there. So inside the tech industry, outside the tech industry, I've just had a blast working with some extraordinary companies on their digital strategies and how they position themselves in this fast-changing world.
Great. Are you a lone wolf, or do you have employees?
I am a lone wolf, and I think that's partly by design and partly just a realization nobody who's any good would ever want to work for me.
Okay, and finally, where can our listeners subscribe to your newsletter?
Bill, thanks. I will have to. I don't have a specific answer for that. But could I tell you a little story about that?
Sure.
So one of the very greatest things about working on my own here and what I'm doing now is I have two daughters. They're both in their 20s, and both of them help me out greatly as contractors. And my one daughter, Ella, is sort of the mastermind behind the newsletter. I had all these articles, and she said, Dad, unless somebody finds one of your articles, they're not going to see it. Why don't we create a newsletter? So she put together the whole strategy behind that and sort of showed me how to work that up. And she's driving this. Then my younger daughter helps out with some research and design of some graphics and other ideas. So it has just been fantastic. Any of the Cloud Wars articles that I have on Forbes or on LinkedIn should have a link somewhere in there, but especially on LinkedIn, anybody in your audience who'd be kind enough to want to take a look at that could find on LinkedIn easy the way to subscribe to it. Or if anybody wants to send me any sort of a note, I'll be happy to get you the link for that.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Bob.
Bill, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you and your great questions.
Technical is a production of Tech Writers NYC. For Technical and Tech Writers NYC, I'm Bill Kozel. See you next time.